What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Josh here from Polymathics, the YouTube channel that helps you become a modern-day Renaissance man. And today, really quick, I'm doing a video on a term called apostasis. And we're discussing the monomyth in particular. And the reason why we're doing this video is because one of my followers, Natalie May, who always comes up with really great questions, she said, "Can you touch on apostasis?" Apparently she doesn't find a lot of information about it on the internet, and there's some reasons why. But in this video, we're going to discuss what it is and what it isn't, and what are some common, I guess, misconceptions about it, and where does it fit in the narrative structure of the monomyth. So with that being said, let's get right into it. First, I think it's very important to discuss what the definition of apostasis is, because personally, when Natalie asked me this question, I was a little confused because I thought she meant apotheosis, and I had never really heard of apostasis before. Now, interestingly enough, apostasis is a part of the hero's journey. However, it's commonly confused with apotheosis because it happens in a similar area of the story. It has similar connotations. And so what I want to do, we're going to talk about the definition, but I want to clear that up, because I think in order to understand what it is and the reason for it, we got to clear that up. So before we even look at the definition, let me say one other caveat about the monomyth. And this is something that I probably should do a video on in and of itself. When I first started this whole adventure myself, looking into the monomyth, I would use certain terminology interchangeably. For example, stages, acts, steps, all these different things. But as I've delved into this topic and tried to make sense of it, tried to codify it in terms of how it fits in the context of the modern day monomyth, how it's being used currently to great effect, what I found is that, particularly in this instance, when we look at a stage versus a step, they're so similar and yet so different. And so let me clear that up first, right? A stage, I want you to imagine a performer is on a stage, okay? There are certain stages in the monomyth that a hero is going to stand on in order to do their performance, okay? And that stage is a large area where several different actions take place. Now, each one of those individual actions or steps that the person takes on the stage, now that would be considered a step in the monomyth, okay? So I think that's a pretty good distinction there, and I'm going to try both in future videos and also in the course that I'm developing on Udemy on structure. I'm making a very conscious decision to be very particular about those nuances, because what I don't want is something like this to happen where people get confused or maybe conflate two different issues into one thing. Because unfortunately, that's the one thing about the monomyth that's in the hero's journey that's difficult. You have several different words that mean similar things being used, and then people who have not given enough time to research the material and delve into it enough to really understand the differences. And so what happens, unfortunately, is there's some misconceptions and confusion. So, all right, now I'm off my soapbox. Let's get into it. First, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share different screens with you so we can look at the definition. I think it's very important when we study something, and I would highly recommend this to everybody when you're trying to learn something for the first time and you don't have someone like me guiding you through it. I would highly recommend looking at the definition and trying to understand what's going on here. Now, the first definition we're going to look at is apostasy. Now, apostasy, you guys may have heard of this before in religion, like the Apostasies or the Apocrypha, right? Those are all different terms going back into the root word, which is that apasta, right? Okay, apostasis. And if you can see here, apostasy, it's a noun, and it's Middle English. It comes from Greek and late Greek and Latin. Okay, apostasis, which is the term we're talking about, apostia and apostasy, and it means the abandonment or renunciation. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, of a religious or political belief. Now, this is important to keep in mind. Now, we're also going to look at another screen here. Stop. We're going to look at another definition just to get yet one more idea. Okay, so now this definition is apostasy. It's coming from dictionary.com. And where did it go? Here we go. Okay, so origin and history for apostasy. The renunciation, abandonment, or neglect of established religion. From Latin, apostasia. From later Greek, apostasia. I don't know, from apostasis. But here's the key here: revolt, defection, literally a standing off. And it says a apostate. So already we're starting to get an idea that this word means cutting ties or removing something from a belief, so to speak, right? And then let's look at another one. Now, what we're going to look at next is what I think is one of the better definitions that I've seen with regard to, here it is, the hero's journey, because those are just general terms that relate to apostasy. We're talking apostasis, and how does it relate to storytelling, right? And the hero's journey. So let's go here. This comes from Heroic Measures, the Hippocratic Medicine and the Making of the Euripidean Tragedy. Oh my God, this is difficult. Euripidean Tragedy. There we go. So I'm going to read a couple lines from here, and I think this gives us a really good idea of how does apostasis work in relation to storytelling. Apostasis is perhaps the hardest of these theoretical concepts to define, not because there are no reasonable English equivalents for the term, nor because we cannot appropriate the importance of this notion of separation or segregation in the Hippocratic thought. The difficulty arises rather in understanding how and when apostasis occurs, and moreover apostasies occur, and moreover in distinguishing between apostasis, a cause of pain, apostasis as a sign of healing, and apostasis as a form of remedy. And so it goes on. He quotes someone from medicine, and there's one other part here that I think is important, which is right here. It says, thus apostasis necessitates further apostasis, and at the same time the body must recover from this expulsion in order to restore itself again to a balanced whole. And to me, that right there is the key of apostasis. And now that we've discussed the definition Now we can actually have a conversation. Okay, we've looked at 3 different definitions that revolve around apostasis. And those were all 3. And believe it or not, there are also medical definitions, which I don't think are as relevant, but even the medical ones, the point is it's a discharge or some sort of cutting off of a disease that one had before. Okay, so if we take all of that in, all of those definitions in, what we have to ask ourselves is, how does this apply to the monomyth? And then how does it apply to my storytelling? And also just real life in general. Because when we're using the monomyth to do storytelling, that means that there's a real life application. And in layman's terms, I'm going to take all of those and give you what I would say my definition is. My definition of apostasis is when an individual removes something, whether it's a physical thing, a spiritual thing, some sort of belief, or some sort of disease that they had previously, and they have to go through pain in order to remove it, but also in order to begin to heal themselves and again become whole, like that previous definition. So, and for those of you out there who already knew what this means, I apologize that I went through all that, but this was something I didn't know. It's not a term that I think is widely known. And even for those of us who have studied the monomyth in great depth, I don't think this is, because here's the issue, and this goes into point number 2. The issue that I see is that when I look online and I look at what people are saying online about what apostasis is in regards to the hero's journey, I see that they're mixing up a step, which is apostasis, with a stage, which is apotheosis. And so I'm not going to go into depth about what apotheosis is because I've already done a whole video on that. And if you're interested in learning what that is, check out the video that I did. But in short, apotheosis is when at roughly the middle point of the hero's journey, the hero is going to face their demons, their dragons, this big crisis point. And it's normally they go into a cave-like structure. I mean, there's a lot of symbolism here. When that happens, and they face that creature, they're going to have to, through the step of apostasis, which is a removal of themselves, whether it's a spiritual removal, a physical removal, and sometimes both. One is a physical representation or symbol of what's going on inside. And once that happens, that then allows them to start to heal and become whole for the rest of the story. So you have to remember, like in the beginning of the story, the hero has these flaws and these weaknesses that are preventing them from becoming a whole person, that are preventing them from reaching their full potential. And at this midpoint crisis, when they go through apotheosis, that is the stage that they're in. When they hit that stage, what happens is they reach for the first time a sort of death and rebirth, and I'll talk about that in a second. And what happens is, in that moment of apotheosis, they are one with the divine. They have touched for a momentary second the power of the godlike being. Okay? And if we think about the monomyth, and hold with me here because there's a lot of concepts I'm trying to talk about in order to tie this all in together. If we think about the monomyth, one of the themes that we see is like it's baby steps that are leading us up this giant mountain of enlightenment. Okay? In the beginning, when we start out, we see the hero with their flaws, and one of the first people that they meet is their sidekick. This sidekick is someone who helps them do things, and they're very faithful. Then the next person that they meet is the mentor, which in a lot of ways is very much like the sidekick, except instead of just helping the hero, the mentor gives the hero things. Okay? He gives talismans, he gives advice, things that are going to help him in the special world learn these new lessons. So the hero's kind of like one step up from that sidekick. And then as you go along even further into the journey, you may find even more mentors. But each mentor that you find is going to have a little bit more powerful of an impact on the hero, because they're going to help them further along down the road where there's harder trials. And then you meet the goddess, or you might meet the father figure, okay? And as you're meeting these individuals, they're just larger representations of that first individual, which was in all reality the sidekick. And the sidekick is merely a larger representation of the hero, okay? So the point is, you're seeing larger and larger renditions. Same thing holds true with the hero's actions. You may see the hero fail sometimes in the beginning because of their flaw. And then maybe they win a few times later on down the road because they're finally starting to work that flaw out, okay? But as you see those failures and then sometimes successes, you're also going to see they're larger in scope. When the hero goes through the belly of the whale, that's kind of the first taste of death, okay? And that is the baby taste of the special world. The hero going to the belly of the whale, that's the first taste of the special world where the hero is in real danger for the first time and really something hard is happening to them. When you go further along down the story, the hero is going to face more danger, but the danger is constantly escalating and getting bigger and getting bigger and getting bigger, okay? You're meeting more threshold guardians, and each one is getting stronger and stronger and stronger until at the end, the people that you're meeting are the most powerful, the ones that have the most power along the journey. The reason why this is important is because if you look at apostasis and how it relates to apotheosis, there are several different areas in the journey leading up to apostasis where the hero is going to lose a little bit of himself. He's going to leave the special world. He's going to leave all that he knows, his house, his home, his friends. So there's a bit of apostasis happening at every stage. But there's one particular step that normally happens during the apotheosis stage that is going to clearly be that the symbolic ultimate representation of apostasis. And again, normally this is going to happen in the middle of the story. Why? Because at the middle of the story, that is the turning point. And the turning point isn't just like the action and things that are going on with the hero and his team. What is really going on is the turning point for the hero himself internally and his flaws and the things that are going on. Give me 1 second. I have to, I think my daughter needs some. What's going on, honey? That's okay. How did you do this?
All that.
That's okay. What? Don't mess with this stuff. Just do your homework.
I already did it.
Then watch a show, Grace. Grace, I'll look at that in a little bit. Look, you're free to watch some things. When I come out, we'll do some reading, okay? Okay, I apologize about that. So now I gotta catch my train of thought here again. But so going back to, I apologize. There was a interruption here. So going back to apostasis, it's going to happen in the middle of the story. And if you think about the definition, right, this is when the hero has to remove something that is kind of like a disease, right? They have to remove something of themselves that's holding them back, that is keeping them from reaching their full potential. If you look at the other part of the definition where it was talking about apostasies, it's this thought of excluding yourself or removing yourself from your religion or from a religion. And so I want to, again, we're putting this in context of the story structure in the monomyth. So for your hero, apostasis is the removal sometimes of a physical body part to represent what is going on internally, which is the removal of oneself from their old self. Just like a snake sheds its skin, just like a snake sheds its skin, the hero is going to have to go through that apostasis moment. That is a step along the journey in the apotheosis stage. That's the biggest thing I want to be clear about is from all of the research that I've done, the countless hours that I've read and listened to Joseph Campbell and his works and everybody else, I've never heard apotheosis be called apostasis. And I think that it's being confused by some other outside entity. I'm not sure. That's not to say, though, that apostasis is not a part of the monomyth, because it is. Now, as I mentioned in a comment on an earlier video when Natalie May asked me this question, what I mentioned was that I think it's been known as different in different words, right? There's different terminology that's been used to when people are describing apostasis. I'm having a difficult time keeping everything together. And that term normally, I think, is dismemberment. In the modern sense of the word, at least Christopher Vogler in his book uses the term dismemberment a lot. But you know what? After doing a little bit of research and trying to figure this out, I realized that for me personally, I like the term apostasis. And let me tell you why. Because dismemberment can happen all throughout the story. In my mind, dismemberment is those smaller iterations where the hero is being dismembered from their family or their home or their job or their whatever the normal world was. Apostasis, though, that's a very, like, if you use that term to describe it, either one works. But if you use that term to describe that moment, that step in apotheosis, to me, that's a really good way to remember that this is the special dismemberment, because it's not just a physical thing or people. It is that thing which is plaguing your hero's mindset. It's not necessarily their religion, but it's a belief. It's a flaw that they had, and for the first time, they're going to let loose of that flaw. Now, we're going to talk about a few film examples here, but what I would say is that you can have a physical representation of something like that happening, like a hero losing a limb or something, but it's not going to mean anything if there isn't some internal change in the hero. So you can show them losing people, losing friends, losing whatever. That's fine. But that's, in my opinion, the apostasis, the impact of it is really what's happening inside the hero. Now, using a physical symbol or image like a dismemberment has worked very well in many stories, and we're going to talk about those, to show that apostasis moment. And so, in my opinion, the two go hand in hand. If you can have a physical representation of that internal struggle, that's good. And it could even not, it could be a person who has represented that flaw for a long time. Maybe they die, or maybe the hero is the one that removes them. I'm not, I'm going to throw out some examples so that you can kind of understand how this meets. But to clear things up, there are multiple dismemberments that go on throughout the story, both physical and external dismemberments. But apostasis should be that one removal that is the removal of the hero's flaw. That doesn't mean that the flaw isn't going to come back. It's even like we looked at in the definition. I'm going to go back here because I really thought it was a great definition. At the same time, the body must recover from this expulsion in order to restore itself again to a balanced whole. And to me, that's a really great definition for what's going on with the hero, because even after they may remove that flaw, it's going to take a very long time, or not a very long time, but it's not going to be immediate that they're just, boom, they're good. They're done. Something they've been doing their whole entire life, or someone they've known their whole entire life, or a limb that they've had their entire life, like it's just gone now, so I'm over it. No, it takes a long time to heal and become one again. And I really like that connotation there. So I'm not sure where apostasis came into this whole terminology with the monomyth. All of the studies I've ever done, I've never seen the word come across until this question. But it has somehow come into the conversation because after Natalie brought this up, I did some research and I see other people are talking about it. But the key thing here is it's not apotheosis. Apotheosis is the stage itself. It's far more powerful than apostasis. Apostasis leads to apotheosis, but they are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. The apostasis is the cause, and the apotheosis is the effect. Apostasis is the hero removed that thing that was preventing them from reaching godlike status. Apotheosis is that momentary godlike status that allows them to, for the first time, feel the power of the divinity, of the divine. And later on in the story, when you get to the final battle, the climax, that is where the hero no longer is just hitting godlike state, momentarily, but they can enter it freely and use it however they need. So a good example would be Neo from The Matrix, right? In the center point of the film, he kind of has a grasp of how he can manipulate the Matrix, but it's not until the end of the film where he's so fluent, where it flows through him, that godlike power, that he can get shot by bullets and just rise up and still take out the agents, right? So speaking of which, now that I've beaten this horse to death, let's go into some actual examples that we see in modern day film, because in my opinion, this is where it's going to help us the most, right? How do we look at how it's been done recently in order to implement it into our story structures so that it can carry that weight in the real world? We just talked about the Matrix. Another symbol that I think is very powerful is in Star Wars. Star Wars is one of the biggest films with dismemberments like ever. You have several different, if you look at the prequels as well, I mean, dismemberment happens all over the place. But this is a good point to think about, okay? Where are those moments where dismemberment really doesn't mean anything, and where are those moments where it does, okay? And I think the two that shine out in my mind are, if you look at the original trilogy, okay? When Luke loses his hand, that's a huge dismemberment, and in my opinion, that is the apostasis for the overall trilogy, the overall trilogy of the first three, the original three movies. He faces Vader, which is his dragon battle. He loses to Vader, and then he has his hand cut off. Now, this is huge because not only is this a dismemberment, so psychologically, our minds connect with that. He just lost a part of his body. But then throughout the rest of the film, whenever we see Luke's hand in the glove, and later on we see it's a robotic hand and things like that, we remember the battle. And it's so important because at the final battle, at the climax in the third movie, in Return of the Jedi, where Luke, first of all, he cuts Vader's hand off, and he sees Vader's hand as a robot hand. It brings us back to the moment of Apostasis, where Luke had his hand cut off. And there's a moment of realization. This is actually very well done storytelling, because what happened there is Luke sees for the first time Vader is more machine than he is man. And this has been kind of the theme of the whole story in all three of the movies, is that instead of giving into a system, which is the flaw, right? We're so connected into computers and systems and government and bureaucracies that we lose the human aspect of ourselves. And so when Luke sees Vader's hand and he looks at his own and he remembers that it's robotic, he starts to see that he's going down the same path, and that's what prevents him from giving into his anger, and thus learning basically the final lesson of the Jedi, which is you can't give in to your hate or your anger or your rage. That's the path of the dark side, right? So in my opinion, that's one of the best ways that I've seen Apostasis used to great effect, because it doesn't just serve one movie, it serves the following movie as well. Now, you could also say that Apostasis has happened again, maybe in a smaller form or a dismemberment form, when Vader loses his arm, because Vader also, right, he's just been defeated by his son, and he's learned all these new facts, like he has a daughter and all this other stuff, and very shortly after, he defeats the Emperor, who he's worked for so long. Why? Because he is starting to come back to his old self. His Anakin Skywalker, I was a Jedi, I was a good guy, I was a human once, not just a machine that served this systematic government called the Empire. In the prequels, we see two other Apostasis moments. One is when Anakin loses his arm against Count Dooku, and the other is when Anakin loses his half of his body to Obi-Wan when he makes the jump in Revenge of the Sith, and he loses his limbs. Now, in my opinion, both of these are not as powerful as the Luke losing his arm. And the reason I say that is because, pardon me, the lesson that they teach is not as powerful as the one that carried on for Luke. The one that carried on for Luke was very powerful. For Anakin, I think the lesson that he learned from losing his arm was that he can't take everything on himself. He has to do this together with a team. And while that is a powerful lesson, Anakin doesn't seem to learn about it. And it also, storytelling-wise, there just wasn't as much power and there wasn't as much thematic power that was put behind that. Whereas the thing I did like about at the end of Revenge of the Sith, when Obi-Wan basically cuts Anakin down, removes several of his limbs, is that it was a tragic ending for Anakin. Someone who had, in Obi-Wan's lines where he's like, "You were the chosen one. You were sent to destroy the Sith, not join them." Right? That part for me was the most powerful part of all the prequels, because there was actually some real thematic pressure being applied to that moment. Because Anakin losing all of those limbs, in a sense, is like he has lost his humanity. He's lost the majority of his humanity by joining this systematic government, this emperor who is trying to take everything to himself and have all of it to themselves, this tyrannical government, versus everybody sharing, which was kind of the lesson before, the thematic lesson before. But so there we have two dismemberments. Another dismemberment that you can think of is when Frodo, at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, when he loses his finger to Gollum, that is Frodo lost a part of himself there because he wasn't able to initially give up the ring. And so his shadow, which was Gollum, he took it. Now, in my opinion, that's more of a dismemberment than an apostasis moment. But I think the point is, apostasis is that large moment in the middle of the story where it can have the most impact because it leads right into apotheosis. But there are smaller forms of apostasis that can be seen in dismemberments throughout the whole story. And even though they may not have as much impact because they're not propelling the character into the arc of them changing their ways, the dismemberment at certain points in the story can still have a powerful and symbolic effect on the audience. So the one with Frodo, I think it shows, like, you know, Frodo, there was a part of him that wasn't willing to give up the ring. And because of that, he lost a part of himself that he can never get back. Go back to Star Wars one last time, because there was a dismemberment that I wanted to bring up. Was in Star Wars, Obi-Wan, in the first one, in The New Hope, he faces Darth Vader, which is, again, the dragon battle. And right before Luke reaches apotheosis, which is the first time he truly connects with the Force, he hears, you know, Vader cuts down Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then shortly, just moments later, Luke hears Obi-Wan through the Force. That is a power in the Force that Luke had never met before. He was feeling the Force for the first time. It was flowing through him. We see this also in his actions, where he's able to hit several stormtroopers, and the box that shuts the doorway to the hangar base so that Vader can't come after them, right? So all of this happened. The apostasis there isn't a limb of the person, but rather the removal, the loss of the mentor. And some people might say, well, then how does that tie into the theme? It ties in great, because the theme of Star Wars and the theme of many maturation plots is that the hero must do what they believe is right. At some point, it has to be on the hero. And so when they lose that mentor, when they've lost that, and for Luke, he loses the physical presence of Obi-Wan for the remainder of the films, it's huge. That's a huge point, because now he realizes, hey, it's on me. I got to do it. His flaw is he's too dependent on people, on his uncle, on Obi-Wan, on Han, right? Han leaves for a while. It's because Luke has to learn, I have to do it on my own. I have to figure it out on my own. I can't use the targeting system. I have to use my own intuition to defeat the Death Star. And again, you look at the loss of Yoda, you could see a very similar tie there. The point is, if you go through different movies, some people there's one other movie I wanted to bring up because it has a really good one. As Dorothy is approaching, they've went to the Emerald City, they spoke to the Wizard of Oz, and as her and her team are approaching the witch to get her broomstick, the witch sends out her flying monkeys, and the team is dismembered. And because this is happening around the midpoint, now I wouldn't consider this so much I don't know. this might be able to serve as that major apostasis moment. But the thing is, the team is dismembered, and not only do we see like Dorothy is taken away, the team is fought by all the monkeys, but the other thing is that the Scarecrow is just taken apart. Okay, and when he's reassembled back again, the team is reassembled. So in that sense, the apostasis moment for them, it happens a little bit early, in my opinion, compared to what we see in these other modern stories, but it still has good effect because now you have two different things happening. The team has to reorganize in order to go after Dorothy and find her. And without Dorothy, who is kind of their leader, they have to work together in order to get her. Dorothy, on the other hand, she's alone. And so for a part in that story, she has to face the witch and deal with the witch on her own. And she has to realize that it's her. It's kind of very similar to that Luke issue where all of her mentors are gone. She's been separated from them. And it's the first time that she realizes, like, hey, I can't always rely on other people. I need to rely on myself. And now to tie this all in, right, with apotheosis and all that, the key to apotheosis for all these stories is that the hero they are at one. They have reached a godlike state. And the way Joseph Campbell described this in several seminars was he actually said there were I think he said there were 4 different types of crisis moments that a hero may meet. Now, in modern day storytelling, we see almost all of these happen in a story. But what he was saying is in fairy tales and mythology throughout, you might have 2 of them or 1 of them, but you didn't always have all of them, right? And he was saying there were 4. 1 was the meeting with the goddess. 2 was atonement with the father. 3 was apotheosis, which we're talking about. And 4 was the retrieval of the boon. And all 4 of those actually served as a crisis moment. Nowadays, what we see is a blending of all of those in most films. And that's probably why they're so powerful, because they're hitting our subconscious from multiple different areas. But the point is, so the first one, meeting with the goddess, that was learning the divine power of the mother, of the nurturer, and the good and evil of life itself, right? Atonement with the father was the finding one's mission in life and becoming aware and somewhat detached from the horrors of the world. And Joseph Campbell would talk about nirvanic state and all this other stuff. Basically, the point was that the world is filled with all kinds of terrible things, horrific things, and it is the hero's job from the male state, so to speak, that it's not to try to explain or justify those things, but to just understand that they exist. They are what they are. The world, because everything consumes, it also destroys. And so you had the mother, the father, so to speak, and then atonement. I'm sorry, not apotheosis. Apotheosis was somewhat of a Buddhist belief where the jewel, he said, the jewel is in the flower, right? Meaning that when you put the 2 together, the mother and the father, there was this androgyny, which was the power of the divine, the godlike power to have the balance between both feminine and masculine, paternal and maternal, to find at oneness as a human, as a whole being, right? And the third one, apotheosis, that was a concept where the Buddhists would discover in their stories that the jewel they were looking for was within the flower, meaning that the power of the divine was within the person, the being. Both the masculine and the feminine, when put together, creates this godlike power, and the person found that on their own. And then the third one was through a boon. So some object that represented that power was actually, that was how they were to come to this godlike state. Now, like I said, that all of those four that we just talked about, those were Joseph Campbell. He would talk about them as there's four ways that someone reaches the godlike state. But both in the monomyth that he brought up, that he created in the hero's journey, and also in modern day storytelling, we see, like I said before, a mix of these things, and almost down to like there's a formula now where like the hero does this, then they do this, then they do that. So anyways, I know this video is long, but I really want to cover this stuff. In my opinion, just to recap, apostasis is not a major stage of the monomyth, but rather it's a step that, when done correctly, at the right moment, which is normally the midpoint, and right before apotheosis, can have a lot of power, and it can show a physical change in the hero, either the makeup of the hero or the makeup of the team, that's going to cause a turning point, allow the hero to reach that divine power for a moment, and then also allow them to heal and become, like the definition said, like restore themselves to a whole person by the end of the story. So also there can be dismemberments throughout the story, some before, some after, but in my opinion, apostasis normally happens in the middle, normally right before apotheosis, and normally it has more than just a physical effect. It is a internal effect on the hero. So I hope that helps. And if you think I got it wrong, leave comments in the section below. If you think there's more things that need to be clarified, leave comments in the section below. But until next time, I hope this has been informative. I hope it's been helpful, and hopefully not too long. So until next time, take it easy.